What is it about alien abduction cases that causes so much trauma for some of the victims? Is it a feeling of being helpless or something more? Are screen memories implanted into the victim to somehow help them cope with the abduction, or are some of their memories simply erased? And what about missing time? Is missing time a common theme among alien abduction accounts? Do many of the abductees show similar physical signs, and are there often multiple family members who experience these encounters? What do the skeptics say about alien abductions and what they may be? Join me and UFO and paranormal author and researcher Nomar Slevik and Mike Stevens, whose accounts Nomar documents in his latest book, Granite Skies, A Disconcerted Journey Through the Unknown. Well, greetings, fellow truth seekers, and welcome once again to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, KRI Research, and it's so exciting to be back here with you once again for another great episode. So tonight, I've got repeat guest Nomar Slevik joining me, and he's bringing along another guest, and that guest is Mike Stevens. And Mike Stevens has experienced alien abductions throughout his life, and Nomar documents that in his new book. So we're going to be talking about that. Mike's going to be talking about his experiences. Nomar's going to be talking about working with Mike and in writing the book. It's really exciting to have him on the show. This is going to be a great, great show. And so I hope you really enjoy it. If you haven't been over to the Facebook page, pay us a visit there at facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal. Make sure you visit us on the website at passion, the number 4, theparanormal.com, and there you can catch up with some past episodes. You can sign up for the Passion for the Paranormal newsletter, and you can also check out some great Passion for the Paranormal merchandise. So I hope you visit the website, and whatever podcast app you're using out there, and we're pretty much on all of them, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and help us out with that. And if you know of a friend, family member, or coworker you think would like to tune into the show, just go ahead and share a link with them. And without further ado, we're going to get into this great discussion with Nomar and Mike Stevens. And thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so my return guest tonight is paranormal researcher and author Nomar Slevik. Nomar is author of UFOs Over Maine, Close Encounters from the Pine Tree State, in his 2018 book, Otherworldly Encounters, Evidence of UFO Encounters and Abductions. He also co-produced Abducted New England and was producer of his most recent documentary, Otherworldly Amor. In Nomar's latest book, Granite Skies, A Disconcerted Journey Through the Unknown, he documents the lifelong, bizarre, and terrifying ET encounters of New Hampshire resident Mike Stevens. Nomar and Mike are both here tonight to talk to me about Mike's harrowing, lifelong ET experiences. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Curry, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Mike,
thanks for having us.
You bet. Yeah, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. Interesting book, real interesting book. Again, I didn't get to read it word for word, but got to go through some of the accounts, and quite a fascinating, yet seems like harrowing and even traumatic journey, Mike, you've experienced through some of this. But before we actually get into some of the accounts here, maybe Nomar, if you can take us back to what led you into doing work on this book and to documenting and writing a book about Mike's story.
Well, that really starts with the beginnings of Mike and I's friendship, really. We first started talking to each other because he would put on events at a location in New Hampshire called the... Mike, what's the name of it? I'm sorry?
KRI Center for Consciousness Studies.
Yeah, that's right. We met at the KRI Center for Consciousness Studies. He would put on events and would invite me down to speak to the good people down in New Hampshire. And from those interactions, a friendship emerged, and I started hearing about Mike's encounters and all the stuff that he was going through. And then we started talking seriously about it, Mike, maybe a year and a half ago?
Yeah, because we kind of talked about it, and then, life got in the way, and we both floated doing other stuff. So, but yeah, it was really like a year ago when we started, seriously working on it, I think.
Yeah, and when we started seriously diving into the project, what resulted in those initial meetings were long-form interviews that I conducted with Mike. They were both in person. One was at a hotel in Kennebunk, Maine, and another was at Mike's office in Newmarket, Newmarket, New Hampshire. And those long-form interviews, Mike basically covered all of the same scenarios and all of the same encounters. But as an interviewer and as a researcher, you want to make sure that you're asking proper follow-up questions. And from that first interview, I had a bunch of unanswered questions that led me into the second interview. And it was just startling and overwhelming and honestly sad information. And when Mike and I started discussing what information that he's given me can actually go in the book, I'm not really sure what got into Mike, but he said everything. Let's put everything in there.
Now, Mike, I remember reading the first account you had in the book, and I'm wondering if you could, because this is how it kind of all started for you. It sounds like you were 4 years old. You and your cousin had an experience. Can you talk a little bit about that first experience and what you recall from that?
Yeah, so we're not, exactly sure on the age. Best we can figure is about 3.5 to 4 years old. And we're at my grandmother's house in Southampton, New Hampshire, and there was some type of family function going on, a birthday party or something, because everybody was there, extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, all that sort of thing. And the way my grandmother's house was set up, she had this little, 3-season sun porch that overlooked the backyard right off the dining room. And I ended up walking by the dining room because it was kind of like where you had to go by to get to any other room in the house. And as soon as I walked by that dining room, that sun porch, there was this immediate calling to get outside. I don't remember how I got outside. The next thing I know, I'm standing in the driveway, and my cousin, who's 6 months older than I am, is out there with me. And, that's its own little mystery how one of us could have made it past all the adults, never mind two of us. But anyways, we find ourselves standing out there, just waiting for something, but we don't know what's going on. The next thing we know, the wood kind of glow red from the tree line behind the house, behind the yard. And the next thing you know, you see this craft kind of emerge above the top of the trees, and it floats, silently, effortlessly, and kind of parks itself right to the side of this big tree that used to be at the end of my grandmother's driveway. And I hate to say it because it's so stereotypical, but it's what it looked like was that, classic saucer dome-shaped object. And it had a row of lights around the middle of the object, and they kind of just rolled in a color sequence, and it didn't look like individual bulbs. It was more fluid. And then all of a sudden, the pattern on that light bar changed, became more aggressive almost, and started changing brighter colors faster. And then when that happened, it's almost like when you open a car door, an interior light came on in this object and revealed a row of windows right above that center bar. As far as my standing memory went, that was kind of the last thing there was a blank, and then the next thing I remember is this craft at the other end of the driveway by the street, hovering above a light pole. It kind of sat there for a moment, and then just shot off up in the blink of an eye into nothing until you couldn't see it anymore. And that was kind of my first standing memory of any of this.
Now, Mike, I wanted to ask you, and by the way, it's great to have you here on the show because I do a lot of interviews with guests, and a lot of them are researchers and have researched about other people's experiences. But it's great to have someone that's had firsthand experience. Now, in this first experience you had, as I remember, some of this was recalled during hypnotic regression. Is that correct?
What I just told you was all standing memory. I've always had those memories firsthand. was a hypnotic regression regarding that incident, which kind of filled in the middle. And, people feel how they feel about the regression. So, but yeah, no, what I just said was all standing memory.
And now with the regression, was that, did you have some sort of sense that you were inside a craft, that you were actually interacting with beings? Can you talk a little bit about the hypnotic regression part of that and what came out?
Yeah. So I did the regression in early to mid 20s when they finally did the regression for it, and it did seem that I appeared to be in the craft. I don't remember how or being taken into the craft. I did encounter one creature that I didn't really see a face or a head or anything. I just saw like a torso, and it was weird going through the regression or listening to it back because I had empathy for this being because of the way it was hunched and stuff, which kind of didn't make sense to me, where it was so surreal to begin with. But I somehow find myself basically laying down. I don't remember seeing a table or feeling a table, but the feeling was almost floating, but laying down, and I could sense a lot of things around me, but I even in the regression, I wasn't recalling visually, like seeing faces. And what came out of it was, a really familiar feeling that, this was a checkup and this has happened before. And that came through pretty strongly. And then I snapped myself out of the regression when I realized that, most of what was going on around me was more of a distraction at the time, because whatever was going on was taking place to my cousin.
Yeah, interesting. Now, so you really didn't get a view of these beings in this particular, first experience. You didn't get kind of what they looked like, or so you didn't get any looks of faces or anything like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I didn't mention it earlier. So, like, when that interior light came on, you could see, like, shadows of, like, shoulders and heads. And there were at least 3 beings, humanoid-looking, shoulders, heads, that I saw when that happened. But I didn't see any, recognizable features at all.
Now, you mentioned something else interesting here, and is that you felt like there was some sense of familiarity, maybe with the beings, or like this had happened before. Do you think that kind of set you at ease in the experience a little bit, or was there still kind of a lot of fear factor here that you remember?
Oddly, when I was in there wasn't a lot of fear, and for many years, probably even now, when things happen, I am more terrified. Like, seeing an object will shake me, like, more than being actually with them. I don't know whether it's a familiarity or they have some type of calming effect, but just seeing a craft close is really one of the most scariest things for me, because it clicks that it's about to happen. Sure.
And now in the book, and you talked about, I think it's KRI, but there's also mention of the your Granite Sky Organization. The slogan is, "It's about people, not proof." Can you talk a little bit about that and what you do with that?
Sure. So in a real short description, I basically help anybody who's had any type of ET encounter, if they had a close sighting, maybe not, they didn't even have an abduction or, see a being, but they had a, really close sighting of a craft and it shook their worldview. I work with anybody who's had that experience. We do a lot of group meetings, and the people not proof is, we're still fighting over whether UFOs are real or not. And I don't really care. Like, somebody could come up to me and prove there's no such thing as, extraterrestrials. These people have all experienced something. That part's real. The trauma's there. The the cause might differ, but the effect is real. So, I don't make people try to prove their story to me. I just really take it as open as I can. And at the end of the day, worst case scenario, if somebody's that desperate to talk to another human being that they're lying, I can give them 15 minutes of my time.
Sure. Now, has this also, because I know, Mike, and this is covered in the book, Nomar covers this in the book, you've dealt with a lot of mental trauma. Some may even say PTSD over your experiences over this. Has this working and interacting with other experiencers, has this kind of helped you along the way in your experiences too? Has it kind of helped you deal with and cope with this?
Yes and no. It's very circular. So, like, when I work with people, it's not like I'm, in a big white lab coat in a doctor position while they're laying on the couch. It's very just person to person, very personable. Every person's different. You handle everybody uniquely. And yeah, sometimes, when you're helping them, they're actually helping you at the same time. And the other side of that is, you have your own experiences that have done their own damage that weigh on you. And now, you're carrying around this weight of these other people's experiences as well. So, I mean, you need outlets. You need to, know how to de-stress yourself, because it can get you, obviously. Did to me at some point.
Right. And I wanted to ask, Nomar, for you, you've covered and documented other abduction cases. Can you talk a little bit about how this case was similar to some of the other cases you've documented, and how it was also different?
Sure. On the grand scheme of things, it's similar to all the other cases because an individual experienced something that they couldn't explain. Now, within those, there are some common threads happening at nighttime. It starts with, a twinkle in the star, in the sky, and, it might seem like a star. Maybe it's a satellite because it starts moving. All of a sudden, it starts getting bigger. And then describing the beings themselves, shorter in stature, bulbous heads, big black almond eyes, things like that were a lot of the similar common traits. And even in regards to these common traits, could those common traits be screen memories in and of themselves of some sort? Because the one of the biggest common threads throughout these stories are screen memories, and it's a common theme for Mike, and it's a common theme for a lot of folks, where people might remember having a restless night and interacting with an owl of some sort. Maybe it was at the window, something to that effect. That's just one, minor example. And maybe this alien phenomenon is so ensconced in society now that some of those imagery are being used by these extraterrestrials as screen memories to still not see what they truly are. Now, that's just a theory. It's not something I subscribe to, but just a thought process that runs through my mind when I'm conducting these interviews and researching these cases. Now, how it's different is because the biggest way it's different is how much I got to know Mike as opposed to another person I interviewed. Typically, I interview somebody for maybe 15 minutes, maybe an hour or something like that. Or it's over the phone and it's not in person, or sometimes it's just through like Facebook Messenger. I always want to do whatever the individual is comfortable doing. And more often than not, it's not meeting in person, which I understand. They're uncomfortable. They're scared to be judged. And once they get to know me, they kind of loosen up a little bit, but they still might keep me and everyone in regards to their story at arm's length. It's totally understandable. Now, what really got to me about Mike's case is bringing up something that you talked about, which is the PTSD nature and the trauma associated with it, and with Mike's motto of people, not proof. That's not to throw it in the face of the scientific research that you've technology desperately needs, because it does desperately need that. But what it does is that it puts it in the mind frame of believing the victim. And that can transcend across all areas of trauma. And I'm a big believer in that, especially what's been going on with the Me Too movement and what's been going on with some of the cancel culture that's been happening with, the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, things like that, Bill Cosby. There's a million examples, which is terrible. But believing the victim is where it starts. Because what happened. We weren't there. What we're dealing with now is the trauma and what's in their head and what they're dealing with. And that's what needs to be dealt with. That's what they need help with. And to be kind, to be non-judgmental, and to take them at face value, because my belief in them, in their story, doesn't matter. My belief in knowing that they have trauma, that's what's important. And that's the big part where it's different, because I really got to know Mike in that sense.
Yeah, and I wanted to cover, I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here, because I just kind of like to get your take on these things. I had it, and I know you both know Kathleen Marden. She was on the show a few months back, and she talks about this a little bit in her book too. But there's kind of this snubbing, if you will, from the scientific community about this phenomena. When I say phenomena, I mean specifically abduction phenomena. And, there's things said like, the sleep paralysis. Well, that's a common thing that happens to people when they go into REM sleep. There's also a lot of these abduction cases happen at night. When people go into, they're accessing their subconscious, that sort of thing. So there's this, potential for dream states and hallucinations.
I completely agree, and I get into that in the book. What I do in a lot of the chapters is to give you like what happened with Mike, and then what an alternative could be as well. Because I want to present a balanced view, as balanced as I can anyways, but I definitely talk about, there's a whole section about sleep paralysis and what people may be experiencing, and it even gets into like napping and daydreaming, things like that. And also I wanted to go back to the hypnotic regression. I would not call myself a firm believer in hypnotic regression and the accuracy of it. I think memory is very malleable, especially in that state, and I that is brought out in the discussion in the book as well. So what's compelling, though, is the content of Mike's regression, how detailed it is. There's even portions of it where the hypnotist might be asking some leading questions, which in my opinion isn't the best method. It's not rampant through the whole thing, but there are a few leading questions, and Mike's, I guess, mental fortitude, or maybe it speaks to the mental fortitude of hypnotic regression. I'm not really sure what it says, but he wasn't led astray by those questions. He would answer no, or it's a different answer than you might expect by what you were led to believe with the question. So while interesting, not a firm believer, but it's certainly interesting, and Mike's regression in particular is compelling.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that there are a lot of common threads in these abduction accounts in terms of sometimes people are shown things, sometimes there's visions given to them. And again, you mentioned the aspect of this where there's detailed descriptions of what's happening there, which, kind of makes you believe maybe that this is not a dream. This is actually something that's happened. But I always do like to address that, and I think you touched on an important point, too, about hypnotic regression. Now, Kathleen Marden says she's got a way to do it where she really is not feeling like she's leading the subject in any one direction as she's going through the hypnotic regression, which I found it interesting too. But yeah, there are some interesting common threads in it, and I did find it interesting the detailed descriptions of the accounts in the book that Mike had. I wanted to talk, Nomar. You mentioned a little bit about this. Mike experienced the blue baby syndrome, and you talked about the prosaic explanations for what might cause that. But in the end, you kind of offered an alternative perspective or possibility about what that might be.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it ends with like leading the reader into believing the extraterrestrial side of it. I think it's a point of here's two sides of it, and I think the scientific side was actually filled with information, and the extraterrestrial side of it was anecdotal at best. But I wanted to make sure that if I researched and found information scientifically about blue baby syndrome, and then I researched and found information about blue baby syndrome in ufology, then I needed to present both of them because they're both there. So scientifically speaking, really what it all comes down to is that it is a real syndrome that happens in infancy, typically below 1 year old, and it has to do with the water that they're consuming, either in formula or another way that they might ingest water. And what scientists have found is that nitrate-rich water can cause infants to have their skin turn blue. And that can happen from, different additives that are in groundwater, typically in non-urban settings. And Mike being in New Hampshire is certainly not an urban setting, thinking of Boston or New York or something like that. However, it's definitely not in the sticks either. It's certainly a well-established town, lots of business, lots of people live there. So you can kind of play both sides of the coin there. On the other side of it, there are instances where experiencers have seen blue aliens or aliens with blue skin. They're often described as sparkling, which kind of makes me think of like the Twilight vampires, which is frustrating to think about. But what I found in that research anyways was not really a cause for aliens having blue skin, just that people have witnessed aliens with blue skin before, and one witness in particular witnessed a child that was blue-skinned, and that child was very fearful of their life, or for their life, for whatever reason that they were communicating with the witness with. And when I read that in particular, it really made me think of Mike and Mike's mental state and what Mike has gone through his entire life, and I thought it was poignant to put that in the book.
Interesting. Yeah, Mike, I wanted to ask you, now, you've had, multiple experiences throughout your life. How many of these actually, details were fuzzy, or you were not able to bring out details until you went through hypnotic regression?
I've only had the one hypnotic regression over that incident. And, it goes with most experiencers. There's always, I tend to remember beginnings or ends. I don't have a lot of middles, which I think I'm thankful for. But, nobody really tends to remember from when it started to when it ends.
Interesting. So yeah, there's is there some aspects, it seemed like as I read through the book in some of these, there was some aspects where there seemed to be some missing time. Was that common with a lot of your encounters?
There's a possibility for it. A lot of my encounters that, I have semi-good recall of where I was when it happened, that sort of thing. I'm out in the woods or I'm out camping. I'm not looking at a clock. I'm not keeping like real good track of time. So there's potential for it, but I don't really know. There's only one instance where I know I actually lost time, and I was with two other individuals. And at a minimum, we all lost 15 minutes. There's some disagreements, it could have been as much as 30 minutes to 45 minutes, but, we can't form a group consensus on that because somebody's a little off or wavy on something. But there was one time where there was at least 15 minutes gone that we know for sure.
Interesting. Now, we also find in a lot of abductees that it's not just them, but there's other family members who have experienced that. Now, have you had other family members who have talked about having abduction experiences or contact experiences?
Funnily enough, I grew up in this, family system where you could talk about ghosts all day. That was fine. That was on the par. Nobody talked about UFOs. And we mentioned Kathleen earlier in the show. So I originally spearheaded the historical marker here in New Hampshire for the Betty and Barney Hill incident. And Kathleen got on board and she did a lot of the heavy lifting and pushed it through. So when that happened and, came to fruition, all right, got that out, came to be, word of that spread around the family. And that's when people started saying, oh, did you know this is when we saw this? Did you know this is when they saw that? Did you know your great uncle was kicked out of a private school here in New Hampshire in the 60s for claiming he was abducted by aliens? And it was like, what? So almost everybody in my family, at a minimum, has had at least a sighting. My daughter's had some pretty strange experiences herself that are in the book. But so, yeah, there does seem to be a family history, but we never talked about it. So that's one of the things I hope this book will do if, when I'm dead and gone, that, if this continues down a family line and my great-grandkids are having something happen to them, they're going to, it's, thanks to Nomar, it's all documented somewhere. Like, look, this kind of tends to happen in our family.
Right. And Nomar, to you, you've researched and interviewed other witnesses who are abductees. Has that been the case in some of the other research you've done that experiencers have had other family members?
Yes. Yeah, yes and no. When I interview people that have simply seen lights in the sky or actual crafts in the sky, whether day or night, not so much. When that happens, I hear more about maybe a friend, saw something years ago, something like that. It's just typically somebody knows somebody who's seen a UFO before. But when it comes to abductions, yeah, that tends to run in the family, and that's not always brought forward at the time that the witness's abduction is brought up. That usually comes out much later in the conversation, and I'm not really sure why, but just from the types of questions that I'm asking, it eventually will lead there if I'm not, if it's not presented to me. And sometimes I'll just come right out and ask, has anybody else in the family experienced something like this? And it's really interesting when it finally dawns on them. They're not so in tune to it like Mike is now, although Mike wasn't always in tune to it. But a lot of the people that I talk to, it's almost like an afterthought, like, oh my goodness, like, yeah, my dad used to tell me, A, B, and C or whatever. So I would say, more often than not, that does come out.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to ask to Mike is, and I know some of these encounters, you said some of the middle parts of them are a little bit fuzzy or kind of, not real strong memory of. But in terms of the type of beings you have experienced, is there one predominant type of being you think you may have encountered in these experiences?
Like as an archetype, I would say grays, and what I mean by that is the enlarged head, big eyes, big black eyes. But I've seen various versions of them. Sometimes they're brown, sometimes they're gray, sometimes they're 4 foot, sometimes they're closer to 5 foot, and that's been the bulk of them. But I've also had experiences with things that would probably, be classified, by pop culture terms as a mantid. something maybe you'd call a reptilian. I don't know. To me, it looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon. So I've had a run of different types of beings, but for the most part, it's been the large-eyed, big-head variations of that sort of being.
In any sense, you hear in some accounts, and this is where it gets interesting as well with the abduction phenomena, because some people come away with it that, they're very frightened and very afraid of whenever these encounters happen. Other people come away, kind of enlightened. They feel like, this was meant to happen to them. And so you kind of get this, this scale of different experiences with people and with abductees, which I find is interesting. But do you think there was some reason why? I mean, maybe this is the $1 million question. I don't know. But do you think there was some reason why you were chosen? And do you think there's a true purpose behind why these abductions, these experiences happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think other than maybe Travis Walton, who was at the wrong place at the wrong time type situation, most of these things are preordained. They are happening for a reason. Yeah, the $1 million question, I'd love to be able to answer it as to why,
Sure.
But I don't know. And is that why it runs in families? Is it this long-term study? It's a theory. Do I know that's true? No. And what you also mentioned was, a lot of people, this isn't exactly what you said, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a lot of people almost who have had experiences, abductions, end up maybe not coming to terms with it, but accepting it. And it does move into sort of a spiritual awakening, where you might not necessarily know why you're part of this process, but you do feel like there's a bigger reason for it.
That's interesting, yeah, because there's also tends to be, and you just alluded to it a little bit there, this kind of spiritual enlightening for a lot of people. Now, you went through a lot of trauma through this, through the years. Was it the latter years where you really started to come to terms with this and maybe thought, hey, there is a reason? I mean, was this really more recent that you've kind of come to terms with this and realized that maybe there is a reason behind all this and a purpose?
Yeah, I do. And I mean, it sounds crazy. I mean, no crazier than saying you've been abducted by aliens, I guess. But yeah, I do. And I mean, Nomar could probably comment on this a little bit too. Like, it really seemed as we were writing the book, we were writing the standard, this happened when, this happened there type of UFO book that's been done over and over and over again. And, there almost seemed like an unseen hand, whether it's aliens, a spiritual, a deity, whatever you want to call it, that turned things into the way it all unfolded. I never this is not the book I signed up to have Nomar write. This is not the book Nomar intended to write. It ended up being the book that needed to be written, though, and maybe, Nomar can jump in on that a little bit.
Well, I think you put it perfectly, where you didn't set out to have me write this type of book. I didn't certainly think I was going to write this type of book, and it's exactly what we both needed as a final outcome. And I'm saying that because with Mike sharing very intimate information about his struggles with his mental health, that includes hopelessness, that includes thoughts of suicide, that include being a poor father and a poor example of someone being in a relationship. Because he was so raw, I don't know if it was instinctual or what it was, but I felt that I needed to be as open as possible as well about my own mental health, which is not extraterrestrial related. And to speak to some of the things that I struggle with, and that it runs parallel with what other people have experienced with trauma in general, which is why I think this book goes beyond the typical alien abduction narrative and kind of really gets into the nitty-gritty of people's mental health and how they cope and how they survive, and honestly, sometimes how they don't survive. I've almost not been a survivor myself. And so that portion of Mike's story really spoke to me. And even to this day, July 8th, 2020, which is an interesting day because I believe this is like the Roswell anniversary date, something like that.
Oh, it was July 2nd, but close.
Oh, okay. Even at this point in time, I'm not 100% good. Everything is not well. I'm not doing awesome. We have little pleasantries, especially when you get on the air, like, hey, how you guys doing? Oh, we're good, but I'm not good, and Mike's not good, but we're here, we're choosing life. And that's a real big deal in our book, for lack of a better term. And we're choosing to go on. And that's the most important piece of it,
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've got military veterans dealing with PTSD. We've got, various different people, first responders. We get into the abduction stories of people that are going through difficult times dealing with this. And I'll ask this to you both, but I'll start with Mike. Mike, how do you feel like your story may help others who are coping with similar trauma that you've dealt with, experiencers, contactees, or others?
How? I'm not exactly sure. I didn't have a set goal like, this part of the book is going to reach them. And I always said, obviously I want the book to do well for Nomar as the author and all of that. But for me, it was like, all right, I just need this book to get into the right person's hands. Like, weirdly, one of the first person who gave us a review after reading the book was that person. They gave it, they read it twice already. Like, some people haven't even got the book yet who've ordered it. This person's already read it twice, and they're like, yeah, I cried. It's a tearjerker, but you changed my life. I cannot tell you how thankful I am for this. And it's like, that is what I wanted. So what line, what part of the book did that? I don't know, because I don't know this person personally. I don't know their story. I don't know which part of it they're related to. What I do know is Nomar took, something that's very dear to me, and not my story or my life, but my concept of people not proof, and he turned it into words, and that really came through. And I mean, because this book, it's my story, but my story is what keeps you turning the pages. The book is really about the human experience, not necessarily extraterrestrials.
Yeah, and again, I didn't read the book word for word, but as I went through some of these stories, I thought, it really kind of helps you and nobody can ever say they understand what you've went through or what you've dealt with, but it still kind of helped put me into that mindset of that, hey, you were dealing with some trauma and some difficult times, but it was also a message of hope that you can get through it, and that there is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel, that you can get through it and move on, as kind of Nomar already alluded to. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, because this is another interesting aspect to the abduction phenomena, and that is the physical evidence side of it. Whether people have had implants, strange marks show up on them. And I know there's a story in the book where you talk about this with regards to your ex-wife and, marks that showed up on her. Any of those kinds of marks or anything ever show up, or did you ever notice any of those with your encounter?
I have like a lump in my leg that it's actually become a lot more predominant in the last couple weeks. But I've always been such a rough and tumble guy. Like, for all I know, it's a piece of glass, it's a rock, it's a, I'm one of those guys who just, whatever, a bull in a china shop, someone's like, oh, you're bleeding. It's like, oh, crap, God knows when I did that. So is it an implant? I don't know. Is there something foreign under the skin? Yeah, probably. But like I said, it could be a piece of glass. It could be a rock. It could be anything. Because of everything else, is there reason to believe it could be an implant as well? Absolutely. And that's the whole view we tried to take with this book. People who don't believe in UFOs are not going to read this and suddenly believe in UFOs. People who already believed in UFOs, this isn't going to give you a stronger case to, go sell your neighbor who doesn't believe in UFOs on. I don't know myself, so I can't sell it anyway. And Nomar, was so understanding of that. That's why he was, the right person to write this book and to do it all that way, that it came out the way it did.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about your camping trip. Your ex-wife, she had a couple of marks that showed up. Can you talk a little bit about that story for the listeners?
Yeah, so we had gone camping up at White's Lake in Tamworth, New Hampshire, and she didn't really believe in all this stuff. I was not. She knew a little bit, that she knew I believed in it, knew I thought I had seen some things, but she was not a believer in this stuff. So we're camping, and she's like, oh, look at these bug bites. They're weird. They're like in a little triangle. In my mind, like, I'm already, engulfed in the culture, going, oh, crap, what the hell's going on, And she's like, laughs it off. But we really liked the site, so we booked it again, the same site for the next year. We kind of ragtagged it the first year with just what we had, but by the next year, the kids were bigger, So we had new stuff the next year, a different tent, different sleeping bags, Everything was pretty much different except the site. And we went, and she ended up with the same 3 triangle marks on her arm again. And so at that point, even she had to question it. And, for her, it's like, it's not enough, it's definitely strange. It's not enough to all of a sudden believe in UFOs, to somebody who doesn't believe. But to me, it's a mental burden. Like, now I'm personally cursed, and now I'm cursing everybody around me. Like, it's a lot to carry.
Now, there were a couple of different times where is it correct that there were a couple of different times that she noticed these marks during the trip?
I think she noticed, she probably noticed them multiple times during the trip, but I think she noticed them, initially once during each trip.
Interesting. Yeah, Nomar, have you, in your research, documented other cases where people have had similar marks?
Yeah, absolutely. Bruising is one of the more common ones, and those, at least in my experience, have been on the thighs, or and more intimately, like on the inner thigh, which is kind of interesting. It's just a lot harder to accidentally bruise yourself on an inner thigh, There's one case from southern Maine where this woman had a grid-like pattern on her back, and it was fantastic to look at, and it looked like it hurt. But she said that it did not hurt to the touch. And it reminded me of this other case that happened, I think, in the 60s. Don't quote me on dates. I don't have information in front of me. But I believe it's the Falcon Lake UFO incident. I believe that's the incident where a gentleman claimed to have been burned by some sort of exhaust or something from a UFO, and a grid-like burn pattern appeared on his stomach. And it looks eerily similar to what this other woman experienced or had on her back, although she didn't experience any of the pain or didn't need medical treatment or anything. It just faded away over the course of like a day. It didn't even stick around very long. But yeah, I guess to quickly answer your question, yes, I have talked to folks that have marks of all types.
Now, Mike, there's a story covered the latter part of the book about how you had an experience. You were kind of seeing, this beautiful type scenery, and I don't remember the details of the scenery, and then it kind of devolved into more of maybe a frightening experience. It seemed, where you were seeing visions of possibly even what could be the destruction of Earth. I think was mentioned. And can you talk a little bit about that experience and kind of what you took from that?
Yeah. So this was probably mid to late 20s. This is, where I'm first really starting to come to terms with all this stuff and, understand, that, all right, this abduction thing is real and it's probably happening to me. So on this incident, I don't remember being taken. I don't remember seeing a light in the sky. I don't remember any of that sort of thing. I remember being on what I call, I assume it was a planet because I haven't seen an atmosphere or a landscape like this on Earth. I call it dumpsters in the snow. Nomar's up here in Maine. I'm up here in New Hampshire. Like, when winter comes, we know what snow looks like. And when it gets deep, it's deep. And so it looked to me like the snow had drifted up, and the only openings in the landscape of this snow white landscape were like dumpsters. And I remember I didn't physically see them at the time, but I could sounds weird, I know. Mentally feel that I had beings behind me walking me through this landscape. And at one point, they made me stop and dig into the, maybe not the planet Earth, but the Earth, the ground. And it was like fine beach sand. And, if you're from a region where you don't have snow, I don't know what to tell you, but it was almost like when you had that icy, crunchy layer on top, and you bust through it, and then there's all that really fine, dry snow under it. So you had to, burst through this crust and then, scoop out this sand, and it was wicked fine. As soon as you could, pull out a handful, it would fill back in, and I have no idea why they made me do that. So it was something that was, the physical part of it, and then this giant, hologram, I guess would be the best way to put it. Face shows up in the atmosphere or the horizon of what you would call, I guess, typical gray, but more purple or bluish in tone to the skin color, shows up. And then I start getting all these mental images of forest burning, oceans, this, that. And there were no words. I didn't hear anything. But the message that I perceived it to mean or to be was, we need to take care of the Earth. We need to. And then I don't remember going back or anything. The next thing I remember is I'm being walked up my driveway, and I have these two, they're both about 5 foot, this brownish color versions of grays. And there's one on each side of me, almost not dragging me, I'm walking on my own, but, escorting me up the driveway. And I kind of, even at the moment, think it's weird, what's with the first class treatment? Why don't I just wake up in bed screaming like normal, And I normally, if they want to communicate to you, you kind of hear it in your head. You understand. But you never hear, or in my experience, I've never heard them talk to each other. And in this experience, I hear the two who are escorting me up the driveway communicate to me. And just to be clear, when I say hear, it's not audible. It's, in my head, they don't let him turn around. And of course, when you hear that, your first instinct is to try to turn around.
Sure.
And I do. And that's when I see this, what I mentioned earlier, this, creature, the black lagoon looking thing. The only difference, between that and the movie was it had more cat's eyes, leaning out from around a tree, looking. And that was kind of the last of my memory. I went out and checked everything in the morning. There was no like scene like these two alien races got into a big fight in my driveway or anything like that. But it was, I mean, I guess all of it's surreal. Yeah, it was just another one of those weird moments that I couldn't tell you what it means. And a lot of my experiences, you know, I think there's more than one species out there. I don't think I was ever expected to have a negative response to my experiences personally. I think I got caught up in something, and because there's another instance where I was a kid where it seemed like one species was teaching me doing this sort of thing, and then there was almost this thing where they interceded where maybe they shouldn't have, from like an abduction type scenario. And yeah, that probably didn't make any sense, because now I just said it and I'm like, that didn't make any sense. Nomar's heard the story. Maybe he can save me on this.
There was a point in Mike's childhood when he had these ongoing encounters with these beings that would come into his room. We don't really know if abductions took place, but he would be visited in his room, and it all seemed to like culminate like 9 months later, where these four beings are in his room, and they're frantic, and Mike can tell that they're upset about something, and the perception that Mike is getting is that they may have thwarted an abduction of Mike from another alien extraterrestrial race, and they were in some sort of trouble, or they were worried about it because maybe that species is more hostile than they are, or, you know, but that's just what he kind of perceived in that moment, and that's insane to think about and frightening to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's something that always makes you wonder when you hear about these abduction accounts, people experiencing different beings. Are there differing agendas? Are there, you know, do some have more of a nefarious agenda and some of the other beings have more of a, you know, maybe, and you've probably heard this, Nomar, with the Greys. Some have described them as just kind of going about their business, and I've heard, you know, in some accounts that they even seem cold and just kind of, you know, lack emotion. And then you get other accounts where people seem to feel that the beings are, you know, they're benevolent, they're there to help. And so it's just interesting the differences you get in accounts, but you know, it does kind of make you wonder, is there differing agendas with different beings that are abducting people?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I don't have any answers, and that's the one true common thread for me. Is the thousands of stories that I've heard or read or researched, is I have no answers whatsoever. And as soon, and again, this is just my opinion, but as soon as somebody says that they know what's going on, that's when you should stop listening to them. Because I don't think anybody knows what's going on. And I am suspicious of quote unquote experts in ufology. I don't think there's any experts in something that's so vague or so unknown. I think you could probably be an expert on a case. You just know a case inside and out. You might have even been the original researcher on a case. Anytime I think of expert, I think of Stanton Friedman. And there are so many cases that he is an expert on, and that's because he's talked to the witness multiple times. He knows the ins and outs of every moment of the encounter, but that doesn't make him an expert on what is actually happening. And he would have been one of the first to tell you, like, I don't know what the hell's going on, you know? But people are experiencing something, and that something in a lot of the cases is causing trauma. And that's a big deal, and that's a big point in the book, is that this book obviously has an extraterrestrial theme running through it, but just on top of that is my own experiences with actually just interviewing Mike and being around Mike, and then my own mental health concerns. And then on top of that, which is the big running theme, is Mike's mental health and how it had its vast ups and downs. and ultimately how he can get through it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly multi layers to the story here, and I think it makes it an even more interesting read. I wanted to ask Mike. There's another story covered in the book. You saw a strange face in the window, and then the other interesting part of this. Well, I'll let you tell it, but there was a connection to a book. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So my grandfather, who passed when I was around 12, so I didn't have the chance to have this great relationship with him. He lived in New Jersey. I was up in New Hampshire. We got to see him like once, maybe twice a year. Ends up becoming a really big part of this somehow through various ways. I won't try to explain it all now, but he was really big on us kids reading. So we go, if we went to New Jersey for a visit, you knew you were hitting the bookstore before, you went home. And we go to the bookstore, and I remember, I don't remember the name of the bookstore, but I remember it being right on an end cap. It had just come out. It was Bud Hopkins' Intruders. And I picked it up, and it was a softback version. So for anybody who's into ufology, like, it's an instantly recognizable cover now. Like, it's got the little classic gray and the tree line and
Sure.
And I grab it, and it's way above my reading level, And so he's like, we get to the register, and he's giving me crap. And this is my grandfather anyways, and we get into some of that in the book. He's just giving me crap. He's like, are you sure that's the book you want? I'm like, yes. He's like, are you really sure? So he gives me all this crap, and I never understand why he's giving me crap. Fast forward a couple of years, and he passes away. Fast forward a couple more years later to when this marker comes out, and I start getting some of the dirt from the family. And that's when I find out my grandfather, who's giving me all this crap for wanting this book, had this huge collection on Roswell. He was fascinated by it. But
Wow.
anyways, all right. You fast forward a couple of years past buying the book, and it sat on my bookshelf for years, as a kid. And we used to have this big, ugly chalkware lamp. It was like a gorilla holding a banana. It was ugly as thing, weighed like 45 pounds. It was, but it sat on the book stand, and the book stand was by a window, and, not the brightest thing, but boys will be boys, and we'd do dumb stuff, and light bulbs were made a lot different than they were now, and we'd sit there and, like, just melt crayons on it, just to whatever, because now, I think if you tried it nowadays, it burst instantly, but now back then, they'd hold out the crayons and melt, and wasn't all that fascinating, but it was something to do. So I'm doing that one day, and for whatever reason, this is all set up right next to the window. I look next to the window, I look at the window, and I see that this is on the second floor, this face that takes up the whole window, and it's very similar to what I discussed earlier, the face I saw on the horizon. And I don't hear it speak. I'm not getting any messages or impressions. And I'm just kind of looking at it going, what the, And while I'm looking at it, I don't know whether this is intentional, just part of it or whatever. This blue jay crashes through the face and hits the glass like 3 inches from my face. And I have this like weird phobia of birds now. Like it's horrible. Because I don't know if you notice this, you cannot go anywhere where there's not birds. You're going to sit and eat somewhere. I'm just over 6 feet. I'm not a small guy. And there'll be a chickadee hopping under the table, and you can see me physically getting uncomfortable. Like, I am terrified of and yeah, it's just one of those things. It seems like an unnatural visceral reaction, but, well, that's what a phobia is. So, like, yes, I know I could stomp the thing, but I'm terrified of it.
Yeah, and I know you had a couple of other instances where, you saw, strange looking animal in the woods. Maybe it coincided with you seeing bright lights or something like that. There have been other accounts of people where they see owls or something like that when they've witnessed a craft. I thought that was also interesting in that, maybe there's some screen memory aspect to that part of the story. But yeah, fascinating stuff. Really interesting. Gentlemen, we're kind of running up against time here. What I'd like to do at this point is I'll have both of you share, where people can find your information, starting with you, Nomar. You've done other books, you've done documentaries. Where do people find your stuff and, find the work that you've done?
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. There's two places to go. One is my online store, which is nomarslevik.bigcartel.com. And the other link, which will still get you to that store, is allmylinks.com/Slevik. And that will have, it's a big aggregator of all of my work. So all of my books are there. And I really appreciate you having us on so we could get the word out about Mike's story. And I just want to add, the book currently, as it stands right now, July 8th, 2020, is in a pre-order status on my website. And copies, if they're ordered between now and the first week of August, will ship the first week of August. It will be available officially on Amazon on August 25th of this year. That is both paperback and Kindle.
Okay, great. And any other works in the horizon, documentaries or other books that you're working on that you're willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always keeping myself busy. And just a quick note about why people already have copies of the book. Mike and I did a fundraiser, and everybody who donated, we ordered a first batch of early arrival books for people that donated. So we had about 44 donators, something like that. So, 44 people across the country have a copy of the book. But for other stuff that I'm working on, I actually have a new book that's going to be coming out next year. It's going to be coming out on Halloween. I know that my work publicly has been nonfiction work in the realm of extraterrestrial visitations, things like that. But my passion since childhood is writing horror and sci-fi short stories. So this book that's coming out next year is a book of 28 horror and sci-fi short stories, and it'll be coming out Halloween.
Wow, cool. I'll have to look out for that one. And Mike, for the center, your KRI Center, I think it is. Can you share a website or how people find more information about that?
Yeah, we actually, it was a financial disaster. We closed the center the end of November. I relocated to Newmarket. I was running 4+ support groups a month. Then this whole COVID thing hit, and it was not a great time to be a group facilitator. But right now, people need to find me. Facebook, look for Granite Skies. That's the best way right now. And from there, you can, I share everything to that page. That page shares everything with mine. You can find me personally that way. And the website is currently down right now, but it's graniteskies.org, and it will be up and running again shortly. We're self-funded. All our, hosting costs come out of donations from the meetings, and we haven't had meetings, but, we're trying to wait this thing out, and obviously it's not going to fix itself anything soon, so we will have the website back up and running. Yeah, and that's the best way to reach me. And like I said, technology's great. I'd love to sit you down in person and, talk to you, because I learn a lot more about your story from what you're saying, and not so much from what you're saying, but how you're saying it. But, you know, the internet does have its pluses as well. So, you know, if you just need to talk to somebody, yeah, find me, reach out. I'm always open.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking with you. You know, enjoyed reading some of the accounts there and stories from the book. Mike, thank you for sharing your story. And Nomar, thank you for writing it. Really enjoyed talking with you tonight. And have a great night, guys.
You too. Thanks so much for having us on. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah, you as well. We appreciate any support we can get.
Okay, so big thanks to Nomar and Mike for having the courage to come out and talk about his story and to share it with the world. And it truly is a fascinating story, and really enjoyed that discussion with both of them. And I hope you really enjoyed tonight's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really looking forward to the next episode, and continue to stay safe out there, everybody. These are crazy times, and have a great night.